Snow fell in relentless sheets across Boston, transforming the city into an otherworldly landscape of white. The wind howled between the historic buildings of Beacon Hill, carrying ice crystals that bit at any exposed skin. Most residents had retreated indoors hours ago, leaving the streets abandoned to the mercy of the blizzard. Most, but not all. A small figure darted between the snowdrifts, barely visible in the white haze. Emma pressed her thin jacket tighter against her body as she ran her breath, forming desperate clouds in the freezing air. Blood trickled from a cut above her eye, freezing against her skin. Her worn sneakers slipped on the icy sidewalk, sending her crashing to her knees. 7 years old, and alone in the worst winter storm Boston had seen in decades. She glanced back over her shoulder, terror fueling her movements despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. No one followed, at least not that she could see through the curtain of snow, but she couldn't stop. Not yet. They would be looking for her. Emma stumbled forward, turning onto a street lined with magnificent townhouses. Beacon Hill, the neighborhood her mother had once pointed out from a distance. "That's where the important people live," she had said. Important people. People who might help. Or people who would call the police. People who would send her back. A particularly violent gust of wind nearly knocked her off her feet. Emma scanned the row of mansions, their windows glowing with warmth that seemed to mock her. Her gaze settled on one at the end of the street. Unlike its neighbors, most of its windows remained dark save for a single light on the top floor. A tall wrought iron fence surrounded the property, but Emma spotted a small gap where a branch had fallen against it. Desperation made the decision for her. She squeezed through the gap, tearing her jacket in the process. The snow in the garden was pristine and deep, reaching to her knees as she waded through it. Her fingers had long since lost feeling, her entire body trembling violently. Then she saw it. Nestled beneath a large oak tree stood a structure that made her pause despite her desperation. A doghouse, but not like any doghouse she had ever seen. This one was a miniature version of the main house, complete with tiny windows and a perfectly proportioned door. It looked warm, safe. Emma crawled inside her small frame, fitting perfectly into the space. It was dry inside, lined with some kind of insulation. No dog inhabited it. The interior remained pristine. She curled into a tight ball, clutching her backpack to her chest, and tried to quiet her chattering teeth. The sound of tires crunching on snow made her freeze. Headlights swept across the garden as a vehicle turned into the driveway. Emma peered through the small doghouse window, watching as a black SUV came to a stop. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure emerged, silhouetted against the blizzard. Michael Grayson stepped out of his vehicle, straightening his shoulders against the assault of the wind. At 45, the CEO of Grayson Construction commanded respect in any room he entered. Tonight, however, he felt none of the power that typically accompanied him. Tonight was December 24th, Christmas Eve, the anniversary. 3 years since the accident. 3 years since he had buried his wife and daughter. He adjusted his coat and grabbed his briefcase from the passenger seat. The board meeting had run late, as meetings often did when he was in charge. He preferred it that way. Work filled the hours, kept the memories at bay. But on this night, nothing could distract him from the ghosts that waited inside his empty house. Michael trudged through the snow toward the front door keys in hand. Something made him pause. A sensation. The prickling feeling of being watched. He turned slowly, scanning his immaculate garden, now blanketed in white. His gaze settled on the doghouse his daughter had begged him to build, a custom creation he'd commissioned from the same architect who designed their home. Elizabeth had been insistent that any dog of theirs would have the prettiest house on the block, though they had never gotten around to adopting the puppy she wanted. After the accident, he couldn't bring himself to remove it. Michael was about to turn away when he noticed something unusual. Tiny footprints in the snow leading directly to the doghouse. Too small to belong to an adult. He approached slowly, wariness mixing with curiosity. When he reached the structure, he crouched down, peering into the small doorway. A pair of wide, terrified eyes stared back at him. Michael stumbled backward, startled by the unexpected encounter. Inside his doghouse was a child. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, with a bloodied face and clothes that hung from her thin frame like rags. "Who are you?" His voice came out harsher than intended, rough with surprise. "What are you doing on my property? The girl shrank back, pressing herself against the rear wall of the doghouse. Her entire body trembled, whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. "Can I sleep in your doghouse tonight? Just until the storm passes. I promise I'll leave in the morning." Something in her voice, in the desperate hope that tinged her words, struck Michael with unexpected force. In that moment, he saw another little girl, his Elizabeth. The way she would look up at him with complete trust, believing her father could fix anything. The memory tore through his carefully constructed walls. "You can't stay out here," he said finally, his voice softening slightly. "You'll freeze to death." The girl lowered her gaze to her lap. "I won't make a mess. I'll be quiet." Michael felt something twist inside his chest, an ache unfamiliar and unsettling. He knelt in the snow, bringing himself to eye level with the child. "What's your name?" "Emma." The word escaped like a secret. "Emma," he repeated, testing the sound. "How old are you?" "7. The same age Elizabeth would have been. The coincidence was not lost on him. Michael glanced up at his house, then back at the shivering child. The responsible thing would be to call the police, child services, someone equipped to handle a runaway. That was the logical course of action, but tonight logic seemed far away. "Come inside." He said the words, surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise her. "At least until you're warm." Emma stared at him, disbelief coloring her expression. "Inside?" "Yes, inside." He stood extending his hand toward her. Emma hesitated, looking from his hand to his face, searching for something. Deception, perhaps. A trap. The wariness in her young eyes spoke volumes about experiences no child should have. Slowly, she crawled out of the doghouse, still clutching her backpack. She didn't take his hand. Instead, she stood a careful distance away, ready to run if necessary. Michael led her toward the house, keenly aware of her footsteps trailing behind him. The silent procession through the snow felt surreal, like a dream he might have had long ago before life hardened him into the man he had become. The front door swung open, revealing the grand entryway of the Grayson mansion. Marble floors stretched beneath a crystal chandelier, the walls adorned with artwork worth more than most people made in a year. Emma stopped at the threshold, her eyes widening at the opulence before her. "I'll get everything dirty," she whispered, looking down at her soaked clothes and muddy shoes. "Floors can be cleaned," Michael replied, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. Emma stepped inside cautiously, her small feet leaving wet prints on the polished marble. Each step seemed like a question, asking permission to exist in this space. She looked around with quiet wonder, taking in the grandeur with silent reverence. "My name is Michael," he said, closing the door against the storm. "Michael Grayson." Emma nodded, but said nothing. Perhaps she didn't trust yet that she wouldn't be asked to leave, or perhaps she had learned that speaking often brought consequences. Michael led her through the house to the guest bathroom, a space larger than many apartments. Emma stood transfixed as he turned on the faucets, filling the marble bathtub with steaming water. "You need to get warm," he explained, placing a stack of clean towels nearby. "There's soap and shampoo. I'll find you some dry clothes." He left her alone, closing the door partially. In his bedroom, Michael searched through his closet, eventually finding a box he had tucked away long ago. Elizabeth's clothes, the ones he couldn't bring himself to donate or discard. He selected a pair of pajamas, simple ones without the princess patterns his daughter had loved. When he returned to the bathroom door, he heard the gentle splashing of water. He knocked softly. "I have some clothes," he said. "They might be a bit big, but they're warm and dry." A small hand reached through the crack in the door, accepting the offering without a word. While Emma bathed, Michael paced the hallway, his mind racing. What was he doing, taking in a strange child, offering her shelter clothes? His lawyer would have a field day with the liability issues alone, and yet he couldn't bring himself to regret the decision. Not tonight. He made his way to the kitchen, another rarely used space in his massive home. The refrigerator contained mostly takeout containers and protein shakes, the staples of his bachelor existence. He managed to find bread, cheese, and soup in the pantry items his housekeeper must have purchased during her weekly visit. By the time Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, Michael had prepared a simple meal. She stood uncertainly swimming in Elizabeth's pajamas, her wet hair combed neatly away from her face. Without the dirt and fear obscuring her features, he could see she was a pretty child, with expressive brown eyes and a delicate chin. "Are you hungry?" he asked, gesturing to the soup and sandwich on the counter. She nodded, approaching the food with obvious restraint, though her eyes betrayed her hunger. "Sit," he said, pulling out a stool at the kitchen island. "Eat while it's warm." Emma climbed onto the stool, her feet dangling well above the floor. She watched him carefully as she took her first spoonful of soup, as though expecting him to snatch it away. When he simply leaned against the counter, making no move toward her food, she began to eat in earnest. Michael observed her silently, the way she hunched protectively over her meal, the careful measured bites despite her obvious hunger, the occasional glances in his direction, assessing, calculating. "Where are your parents, Emma?" he asked finally. She tensed, spoon halfway to her mouth. "My mom died when I was 5. I'm sorry to hear that." He meant it. "And your father? Don't have one." She focused intently on her soup. "Never did." "Who takes care of you then?" The spoon clattered against the bowl as her hand trembled. "I was at Guardian Hope, the children's home." Michael knew of the place, a well-respected facility that housed orphaned and abandoned children. His company had been approached about making a donation to their building fund, though he had declined. Something about the director had struck him as insincere. "You ran away," he stated rather than asked. Emma nodded, her eyes filling with tears that she stubbornly refused to let fall. "Why?" She said nothing, but her hand moved unconsciously to her forearm, rubbing at it through the fabric of the pajamas. Michael approached slowly, kneeling beside her stool. "Emma, did someone hurt you at Guardian Hope?" Her silence was answer enough. "May I?" he asked gently, reaching for her arm. After a moment's hesitation, she extended it toward him. Michael carefully rolled up the sleeve, revealing what he had feared. Bruises in various stages of healing marked her pale skin, some shaped distinctly like fingerprints, others like the buckle end of a belt. Anger flared inside him, hot and unexpected. Michael had built his reputation on being cool-headed, calculating. Emotional displays were for those who couldn't control themselves. Yet the sight of those bruises on a child's arm awakened something primal within him. "Who did this to you?" His voice remained quiet, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "Ms. Hayes," Emma whispered. "Rebecca Hayes. She runs Guardian Hope. Does she hurt other children too?" Emma nodded, a single tear escaping despite her efforts. "Jason got it worse yesterday. He couldn't even walk after. That's when I decided to run." Michael stood, his mind working rapidly. This was a matter for the authorities, clearly. Child abuse was a serious allegation, but something in Emma's expression made him pause. "Have you told anyone before about the abuse?" She wiped her tear away with the back of her hand. "A social worker came. I told her Ms. Hayes was hurting us. She said I was lying to get attention. Ms. Hayes locked me in the closet for 2 days after." The implication was clear. The system that was supposed to protect children like Emma had already failed her once. Would it fail her again? "You're safe here tonight," Michael said, the decision cementing itself in his mind. "Finish your food, then you should rest." "Can I sleep on the couch?" Emma asked timidly. "I promise I won't make a mess." The weight of those words, the fact that a child felt the need to negotiate for the privilege of sleeping on a couch, struck Michael deeply. "You'll sleep in the guest room," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. He led her upstairs to one of the many unused bedrooms in his house. The space was impeccably decorated in neutral tones, the bed large enough to swallow her small frame completely. Emma stood at the doorway, staring at the room as if it might disappear. "It's too fancy," she whispered. "It's yours for tonight," Michael said simply. Emma climbed onto the bed cautiously, as though expecting to be told it was all a joke. She sank into the plush mattress, her eyes wide with wonder. As Michael turned to leave, he noticed her slipping a piece of bread from her pocket into her backpack. A stash for later, an insurance policy against hunger. "If you need anything during the night, my room is down the hall to the right," he told her. She nodded, pulling the comforter up to her chin. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson." Michael paused in the doorway, struck by the formality from one so young. "You're welcome, Emma." He left the door slightly ajar and retreated to his study, a room lined with leather-bound books and dominated by a mahogany desk, the space where he spent most of his evenings when he was home, which wasn't often. Tonight, however, he found himself unable to focus on work. Instead, he poured a glass of scotch and moved to the window, watching the relentless snow blanket his garden. The doghouse was barely visible now, nearly buried in white. If he hadn't arrived when he did, what would have happened to Emma? The thought was troubling. Michael took out his phone, hovering his thumb over the screen. The responsible thing would be to call the police. Report finding a runaway child. Let them handle it. But then those bruises flashed in his mind. The fear in her eyes when she spoke of guardian hope. The bread hidden in her backpack. He set the phone down without making the call. Sleep eluded Michael that night. He found himself pausing outside the guest room door several times, listening to the soft, even breathing of the child within. Each time, relief washed over him upon confirming she was still there, still safe. Around midnight, he finally entered the one room in his house he normally avoided. Elizabeth's bedroom, preserved exactly as it had been the day of the accident. Her stuffed animals arranged on the bed, her drawings taped to the walls, her books neatly shelved. He sat on the edge of her bed, picking up the framed photo from her nightstand. Elizabeth and her mother Sarah smiling at the camera, their faces bright with joy. His perfect family, the one he had been too busy to appreciate until it was gone. "I miss you both," he whispered to the empty room, every day. For the first time in months, Michael allowed himself to cry, the tears falling silently onto the photograph in his hands. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the heavy clouds, the storm having spent its fury overnight. Michael stood in the kitchen preparing coffee when he heard soft footsteps approaching. Emma appeared in the doorway, still wearing Elizabeth's pajamas, her hair mussed from sleep. "Good morning," he said, surprised by the warmth in his voice. "Morning." She glanced toward the front door, then back at him. "The storm stopped." "So it has." Michael poured himself a cup of coffee, then retrieved milk from the refrigerator. "Are you hungry?" Emma nodded hesitantly. "I should go, though, like I promised." Michael studied her for a moment. The sensible thing would be to let her go, call the authorities anonymously, wash his hands of the situation. But the thought of sending this child back into the cold, back to a system that had already failed to protect her, sat uncomfortably in his chest. "The roads are still being cleared," he said instead. "Why don't you stay for breakfast? We can figure out what happens next after we eat." Relief flickered across her face, though she tried to hide it. "Okay." Michael wasn't much of a cook, but he managed to prepare eggs and toast, setting a plate before Emma at the kitchen island. As she ate, he turned on the small television mounted on the wall, flipping to the morning news for a weather update. The reporter was mid-sentence when Emma's fork clattered against her plate. "We're continuing our coverage of the search for 7-year-old Emma Winters, who went missing from Guardian Hope Children's Center yesterday afternoon," the reporter said as Emma's school photo appeared on screen. "Authorities are concerned for her safety, given the severe weather conditions overnight." The camera cut to a woman standing outside a brick building, microphone in hand. She was professionally dressed with shoulder-length blonde hair and a concerned expression that seemed practiced. "We are devastated by Emma's disappearance," Rebecca Hayes said, her voice trembling with apparent emotion. "She's a special child who requires medication for her condition. We're deeply worried about her safety, especially after last night's blizzard." Emma had gone completely still, her face drained of color. Emma suffers from emotional disturbances that can cause her to become confused and sometimes violent, Hayes continued. "If anyone sees her, please call the authorities immediately rather than approaching her. She needs professional help." "She's lying," Emma whispered, her voice tight with fear. "I'm not sick. I don't take any medicine." Michael studied the woman on the screen. Rebecca Hayes projected the perfect image of a concerned caretaker, but something in her eyes struck him as calculated. The way she emphasized Emma's supposed condition, the implication that the child was dangerous. "She's looking for me," Emma continued, panic rising in her voice. "If she finds me, she'll kill me. She said she would if I ever told anyone about what happens at Guardian Hope." The television continued showing police officers organizing a search party. "The community has rallied around Guardian Hope in this difficult time," the reporter narrated. "Ms. Hayes has been praised for her dedication to Boston's most vulnerable children." Michael turned off the television, his decision crystallizing. "Finish your breakfast, Emma. You're not going anywhere just yet." While Emma ate, Michael retreated to his study to make a phone call. Jack Sullivan had been his attorney for over a decade, handling everything from business contracts to personal matters. If anyone would know how to navigate this situation legally, it would be Jack. "You did what?" Jack's voice held a mixture of disbelief and resignation when Michael explained the situation. Mike, you can't just keep a missing child in your home. There's a police search underway. She's being abused at that facility, Jack. She has bruises all over her arms. Then report it. Let Child Services investigate. She already tried that route. They didn't believe her. Jack sighed heavily. Mike, I understand you want to help, but harboring a runaway minor is a serious offense. You could lose everything. Michael glanced through the study door, where he could see Emma still sitting at the kitchen island, her small shoulders hunched. I lost everything that mattered 3 years ago. Today, Jack. A long silence followed. This is about Elizabeth, isn't it? This is about doing the right thing, Michael countered, though the question hit uncomfortably close to home. I need to know my options. How can I report the abuse without sending Emma straight back into that woman's clutches? It's complicated, Jack admitted, but let me make some calls. In the meantime, Mike, be careful. This could blow up in your face spectacularly. After ending the call, Michael returned to the kitchen. Emma had finished eating and was carefully washing her plate at the sink, standing on her tiptoes to reach the faucet. You don't need to do that, he said. I want to help, she replied, setting the clean plate on the counter. Thank you for breakfast, and for letting me stay in your doghouse. Despite the gravity of the situation, Michael felt his lips quirk upward. You're welcome, though I think we can find you better accommodations than the doghouse from now on. Emma studied him, a question in her eyes. You're not sending me back. Not to Guardian Hope, Michael confirmed. Not until I know you'll be safe there. The relief that washed over her face was profound. Really. Emma took a tentative step toward him, then stopped herself, uncertain. Michael recognized the impulse and the restraint, the desire to trust battling with the hard-learned lesson that adults were not to be trusted. Would you like to watch some TV? He offered, sensing her discomfort. Something besides the news. She nodded, following him to the living room. Michael rarely used this space, finding it too large, too empty for just one person. Now, as Emma settled cautiously on the edge of the massive sectional sofa, it seemed to shrink to a more manageable size. He found a channel showing animated movies and set the remote beside her. I need to make a few more calls. Will you be okay here for a bit? Yes, Mr. Grayson. Michael, he corrected gently. You can call me Michael. While Emma watched the movie, Michael made several more calls, first to his assistant, canceling all appointments for the next few days, then to Dr. Eleanor Chen, his personal physician, requesting a discreet house call, finally to David Martinez, a former police detective who now worked as a private investigator, primarily for Grayson Construction. By midday, Dr. Chen had arrived, her discretion one of the many reasons Michael kept her on retainer. She examined Emma in the guest room, while Michael waited anxiously in the hallway. The physical injuries are consistent with abuse, Dr. Chen reported afterward, her expression grave. Bruises in various stages of healing malnutrition, signs of previous untreated fractures. Whoever has been responsible for this child has committed serious crimes, Michael. Will you document everything? Already done. She handed him a sealed envelope. Medical report and photographs should you need them. But, Michael, she added, lowering her voice, what exactly are you planning to do? This child needs proper authorities involved. I'm working on it, he assured her. Thank you for coming, Eleanor. After the doctor left, Michael found Emma back in the living room, once again perched on the edge of the sofa, as though afraid to take up too much space. Dr. Chen says you're underweight, he said, sitting beside her. What would you like for lunch? Anything you want? Emma looked startled by the question. Anything? Within reason, he amended with a small smile. I'm not sure we can get authentic sushi delivered in this weather. She considered for a moment. Could I have a grilled cheese sandwich with tomato soup? My mom used to make that when it snowed. The simplicity of the request, the glimpse into a happier past, tugged at something in Michael's chest. Grilled cheese and tomato soup, it is. While Michael prepared lunch, Emma grew more comfortable exploring the living room. She examined the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound classics that were more for show than reading. She studied the few photographs displayed on the mantel, mostly of Michael at various business functions. Where are the pictures of your family? She asked innocently. Michael froze, spatula in hand. I don't have family, he said shortly. Emma sensed the shift in his mood and retreated to the sofa, her natural curiosity dampened by his response. They ate lunch in relative silence. Michael lost in thoughts, he typically avoided Emma, careful not to disturb his brooding. Afterward, while clearing the dishes, he noticed her glancing repeatedly toward the grand staircase. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Emma hesitated. "I left my backpack upstairs. Can I go get it?" "Of course. This is your home for now. You don't need permission to move around." Her eyes widened slightly at the phrase, "your home," but she said nothing disappearing up the stairs. Michael finished loading the dishwasher, a task he rarely performed himself, finding an odd satisfaction in the domestic activity. A soft gasp from upstairs broke the quiet. Michael tensed, listening. When no other sound followed, he made his way upstairs, concern quickening his steps. Emma wasn't in the guest room. The door to Elizabeth's room stood ajar, though he was certain he had closed it the night before. Michael found her standing in the middle of his daughter's bedroom, clutching her backpack to her chest, staring at the preserved shrine to a life cut short. The pink bedspread, the stuffed animals, the ballet slippers hanging from the bedpost, the photographs he couldn't bear to look at daily, but couldn't bring himself to remove. "You had a little girl," Emma whispered, turning to face him. Her eyes were filled with a wisdom beyond her years. "Like me." Michael stood frozen in the doorway, unable to speak. The room he had so carefully preserved, the memories he kept locked away, suddenly exposed to a stranger. "What was her name?" Emma asked softly. "Elizabeth." His voice cracked on the syllables. Her name was Elizabeth. Emma looked back at the photographs. A little girl with blonde hair and Michael's gray eyes, laughing on a swing. The same girl in a ballet costume, striking a pose. Elizabeth with a woman who shared her features, both smiling into the camera. Where is she now? The question, so innocent and yet so devastating, broke something inside Michael. The wall he had built around his grief crumbled, and for the first time since the funeral, he spoke the truth aloud to another person. She died. She and her mother. Car accident. 3 years ago today. Emma set her backpack down carefully and approached him. Without a word, she slipped her small hand into his. The simple gesture of comfort from a child who had known so little of it herself undid him completely. Michael sank to his knees and, for the second time in 24 hours, he wept. Not the controlled private tears of the previous night, but raw, agonizing sobs that tore from his chest. 3 years of suppressed grief unleashed by the touch of a small hand. Emma didn't pull away. She stood beside him, her hand still in his silent witness to his pain. When the storm of emotion finally subsided, Michael found himself embarrassed by his loss of control. "I'm sorry," he said, wiping his face. "You shouldn't have to deal with a grown man crying. My mom said crying just means you loved someone a lot," Emma replied simply. "It's okay to miss them." Out of the mouth of babes, Michael rose to his feet, strangely unburdened by the release of emotion. "Your mom sounds like she was very wise." "She was the best," Emma agreed, a shadow of loss crossing her own young face. Michael glanced around the room, seeing it through new eyes. The shrine he had created wasn't preserving Elizabeth's memory, it was preserving his pain. His daughter, who had been so full of life and joy, would have hated seeing her room turned into a museum of grief. "I think," he said slowly, "it's time I started putting some of these things away. Not to forget, but to remember differently." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Can I help?" Before Michael could answer, the doorbell rang its chime, echoing through the large house. Emma tensed instantly, fear replacing the compassion in her eyes. "It's all right," Michael assured her, though his own pulse had quickened. "It's probably David Martinez, the investigator I told you about. Stay here. I'll handle this." He closed Elizabeth's door behind him and made his way downstairs, composing himself with each step. By the time he reached the front door, Michael Grayson, CEO of Grayson Construction, was firmly back in place. But when he opened the door, it wasn't David Martinez who stood on his doorstep. It was Sarah Thompson, child welfare officer, her ID badge held up for his inspection. "Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice professional but cold, "I'm here about Emma Winters. May I come in?" Michael stood in the doorway, his body instinctively blocking the entrance to his home. Sarah Thompson was younger than he expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his appearance. Her coat was dusted with snow, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Ms. Thompson," Michael said, his voice returning to the cool, controlled tone he used in board meetings. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" She raised an eyebrow. A child goes missing, and suddenly the CEO of Grayson Construction cancels all his appointments. Quite the coincidence. Michael maintained his composure, though inwardly he wondered how she had connected those dots so quickly. I wasn't aware my schedule was public knowledge. It isn't. She smiled thinly. May I come in? The temperature is still well below freezing. Michael hesitated, then stepped aside. The moment she crossed his threshold, the dynamic shifted. This was no longer his sanctuary. It had become a battleground. I assume you're here because you believe Emma Winters is in my home, he said, leading her to the formal living room, a space he rarely used. Better to keep her contained away from where Emma waited upstairs. Is she... Sarah Thompson removed her gloves, her movements precise. What if she is? Michael countered, remaining standing while she sat. Would you immediately return her to a place where she's being physically abused? Sarah's expression hardened. Those are serious allegations, Mr. Grayson. Do you have any evidence to support them? Besides the bruises on her arms and back, or the malnourishment my doctor documented this morning, Michael crossed his arms. I have a detailed medical report, if you'd like to see it. Something flickered across Sarah's face too quickly for Michael to identify. Surprise, concern, calculation, she recovered immediately. I would actually, but first I need to confirm Emma is here and that she's physically well. Michael weighed his options. Denying Emma's presence would only escalate the situation. Lying to a child welfare officer was a criminal offense, yet every instinct warned him against revealing Emma's location. She's here, he acknowledged finally. She's safe. She came to my property during the blizzard last night, seeking shelter. And you didn't think to contact the authorities? Sarah's tone sharpened. A 7-year-old girl was reported missing. There's a citywide search underway. I saw the news this morning, Michael replied evenly. That's also when I saw Rebecca Hayes claiming Emma needs medication for some condition. Emma says that's a lie. Children often resist taking their medication, Mr. Grayson, especially those with emotional difficulties. Or perhaps adults often lie to control children who threaten their authority. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. I need to see Emma, now. The command in her voice would have intimidated most people. Michael Grayson, however, had built an empire by refusing to be intimidated. Before that happens, he said, I'd like to know why Rebecca Hayes appears so desperate to get Emma back. Desperate enough to fabricate medical conditions on national television. Ms. Hayes is concerned for a vulnerable child in her care. That's her job. Is it also her job to inflict bruises shaped like belt buckles? Sarah stood abruptly. These accusations are extremely serious. If you're harboring Emma Winters and refusing to let me assess her welfare, I'll have no choice but to return with police officers. By all means, Michael gestured toward the door. Bring them. Bring a judge. Bring the entire Boston PD if you want. But know this, the moment you leave without seeing the evidence of abuse, you become complicit in it. The statement landed precisely as intended. Sarah Thompson slowly sat back down, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal uncertainty. Show me this medical report, she said finally. Michael retrieved Dr. Chen's envelope from his study. When he returned, he found Sarah examining the family photographs on the mantelpiece. She lingered on one of Elizabeth at her ballet recital. Your daughter? She asked as he entered. The question caught him off guard. Few people in his professional circles mentioned Elizabeth anymore. The topic had become taboo, a black hole everyone navigated around. Yes, he said, simply handing her the envelope. Sarah studied him for a moment longer before turning her attention to the documents. As she read, her expression grew increasingly troubled. The photographs documented bruises at various stages of healing across Emma's arms, legs, and back. Dr. Chen's clinical assessment noted signs of chronic malnutrition stress and previous injuries consistent with physical abuse. This is concerning, Sarah admitted, closing the file, but it doesn't prove Ms. Hayes is responsible. Emma named her specifically, Michael countered, and described how her previous attempts to report the abuse were dismissed and punished. That's why she ran away. Sarah returned the envelope, her professional demeanor firmly back in place. I need to speak with Emma alone. Standard protocol. Michael hesitated, then nodded. I'll get her. He climbed the stairs slowly, giving himself time to think. The situation was escalating faster than he'd anticipated. Sarah Thompson's quick appearance at his door suggested connections and resources beyond what he'd expected from a typical social worker. Emma was still in Elizabeth's room when he entered, sitting cross-legged on the floor, looking through a photo album. "Emma," he said gently, "there's someone here to see you." Her head snapped up, fear immediately flooding her features. "Is it Ms. Hayes?" "No," he assured her quickly. "It's a social worker named Sarah Thompson. She wants to talk to you about what happened at Guardian Hope." Emma's small body tensed. "Is she going to take me back there?" Michael crouched beside her, meeting her eyes. "Not if I can help it, but she needs to hear from you what happened. Can you be brave and tell her the truth?" Emma clutched the photo album tighter. "Last time I told the truth, no one believed me." "I believe you," Michael said firmly, "and I'll make sure she listens. But right now, she needs to see that you're safe here. Can you do that?" After a moment of consideration, Emma nodded. She carefully closed the album and placed it back on the shelf where she'd found it. The deliberate care with which she treated Elizabeth's possessions didn't escape Michael's notice. They descended the stairs together, Emma slightly behind Michael, her small hand clutching the back of his sweater. Sarah Thompson stood as they entered, her eyes immediately focusing on Emma. "Hello, Emma," she said, her voice softening considerably. "My name is Sarah. I'm here to make sure you're okay." Emma said nothing, her grip on Michael's sweater tightening. "Emma and I need to have a private conversation," Sarah said to Michael. "It's standard procedure." Before Michael could respond, Emma spoke up. "I want him to stay." Sarah frowned slightly. "It's important that we talk alone, Emma. So you can tell me anything without feeling pressured. I want him to stay," Emma repeated more firmly this time. "He believes me." The implication hung in the air. Unlike you, unlike the others, Michael felt a surge of protective pride at her courage. "All right," Sarah conceded. "Mr. Grayson can stay in the room, but he needs to sit over there while we talk." She pointed to an armchair several feet away. Michael complied, moving to the indicated chair while Emma perched on the edge of the sofa. Sarah sat beside her but maintained a respectful distance. "Emma, everyone's been very worried about you," Sarah began. "Can you tell me why you ran away from Guardian Hope?" Emma glanced at Michael, who gave her an encouraging nod. She took a deep breath. "Ms. Hayes hurts us, me and the other kids. She hits us when no one's looking. She locks us in the closet if we cry or tell anyone." "That sounds very frightening," Sarah said, her tone neutral. "Can you show me where she hurt you?" Emma reluctantly rolled up her sleeves, revealing the bruises Michael had seen earlier. Sarah examined them with clinical detachment. "Did you tell anyone at Guardian Hope about this?" Emma nodded. "The nice lady who brings books, and the man who checks our teeth. They said they'd tell someone, but nothing happened. Ms. Hayes found out I told, and Emma's voice faltered. "She said if I ever told again, I'd disappear, like Jason's sister." Michael straightened in his chair. "Who is Jason's sister?" "Lily," Emma said quietly. "She told on Ms. Hayes last year. Then one day she was gone. Ms. Hayes said she got adopted, but Jason never got to say goodbye, and none of the grown-ups will tell him where she went." Sarah Thompson's expression remained carefully neutral, but Michael noticed her knuckles whitening as she gripped her notepad. "Emma, did Ms. Hayes ever give you medicine?" Sarah asked. "Only when important people came to visit." "Pills that made me sleepy. She said it was to help me behave, but I don't need pills. I know how to behave." Emma's chin lifted slightly, a small gesture of defiance. "I see," Sarah made a note. "And how did you end up at Mr. Grayson's house?" Emma described her escape during the staff dinner, how she had wandered for hours in the snow before finding the doghouse in Michael's garden. As she spoke, Sarah's eyes occasionally flicked to Michael, assessing. When Emma finished her account, Sarah thanked her and asked if she could have a moment alone with Michael. Emma agreed reluctantly, retreating to the kitchen, but keeping both adults in her line of sight. "Her story is consistent with the physical evidence," Sarah acknowledged, her voice low. "But removing her from Guardian Hope requires more than just her testimony. We need corroboration, documentation, witnesses." "So you believe her," Michael pressed. Sarah hesitated. "Let's say I have concerns, significant ones, but Ms. Hayes has an impeccable reputation. Guardian Hope has received commendations for their work with troubled children. It will take more than bruises and a child's account to launch a formal investigation. What about the mysterious disappearance of this Lily that Emma mentioned? I'll look into it," Sarah promised, though something in her tone struck Michael as evasive. In the meantime, Emma needs to be placed in appropriate temporary care. She can stay here, Michael said immediately. Sarah shook her head. That's not possible, Mr. Grayson. You have no certification as a foster parent, no relationship to Emma, and frankly, your motives for wanting to keep her are questionable at best. My motives, Michael's voice cooled dangerously. A single man living alone who lost his daughter. Sarah gestured toward the photographs. Your interest in Emma could be seen as inappropriate. The implication ignited Michael's temper. You think I'm what, some kind of predator? Because I didn't turn away an abused child in a blizzard? I think you're a grieving father who may be projecting his feelings onto a vulnerable child, Sarah replied calmly. I think your intentions might be good, but your judgment is compromised. And you think sending her back to a woman who beats her shows better judgment? Michael stood towering over Sarah. You saw the medical report. You heard Emma's testimony. Yet your solution is to put her back into the system that failed her. I didn't say I was returning her to Guardian Hope, Sarah clarified. There are other placement options. Emergency foster homes, temporary shelters, where she'll be just another case file, another problem to manage. Michael shook his head. She stays here until a proper investigation into Rebecca Hayes is completed. I have the resources to ensure Emma's safety and well-being. That's not your decision to make, Mr. Grayson. Then whose is it? Yours, the same system that ignored her previous reports of abuse. Michael lowered his voice, aware of Emma watching from the kitchen. I'll petition the court for emergency temporary custody if necessary. I'll hire the best family law attorneys in Massachusetts. Are you prepared for that battle, Ms. Thompson? Sarah studied him, her expression unreadable. You barely know this child. Why are you willing to go to such lengths for her? The question penetrated Michael's armor, forcing him to confront a truth he'd been avoiding since finding Emma in his garden. Why was he fighting so hard? Was it merely guilt, projection, or something deeper? Because someone has to, he said finally. Someone has to stand between her and the people who want to hurt her. Today, that someone is me. Sarah gathered her notes and stood. I'll be submitting my report to my supervisor. We'll be in touch, Mr. Grayson, soon. As she moved toward the door, she paused beside Emma in the kitchen. Take care, Emma. I'll be checking on you. After Sarah left, Michael stood at the window, watching her car navigate the still snowy street. Emma approached silently, standing beside him. Is she going to take me away? She asked quietly. Not today, Michael assured her, though doubt gnawed at him. And not if I can help it. The doorbell rang again, less than an hour later. This time, it was David Martinez, the private investigator Michael had called earlier. In his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair, and the watchful eyes of someone who had seen the worst of humanity, Martinez carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew how to find answers. Michael led him to the study, leaving Emma engrossed in a movie in the living room. You've stepped in it this time, Mike, Martinez said without preamble, once the door closed behind them. Half of Boston PD is looking for that little girl. I know. A social worker was already here, Michael replied. What have you found about Guardian Hope? Martinez opened his laptop. On paper, it's squeaky clean. Opened 8 years ago. Funded primarily through private donations and state grants. Rebecca Hayes has been the director from day one. Masters in child psychology from Boston University, serves on several child welfare committees, regular guest speaker at conferences. Too perfect, Michael mused. What about below the surface? That's where it gets interesting. Martinez pulled up financial records. Guardian Hope receives substantially more funding than similar facilities of its size. Most of it comes through a shell company called Horizon Charitable Trust. I'm still tracing the money, but initial digging suggests the trust has connections to some high-end international adoption brokers. Michael frowned. International adoptions. How does that connect to abused children? I'm not sure yet, but there's more. And Martinez swiped to another document. I ran a background check on Rebecca Hayes. The credentials are mostly legitimate, but there are discrepancies. For one, there's a 3-year gap in her employment history that she's filled with supposed consulting work that I can't verify. What about during those 3 years? I found a Rebecca Hayes working at a private orphanage in Eastern Europe during that time. Same age, similar background. The facility was shut down after allegations of child trafficking, but no charges were ever filed. Most of the records were sealed or conveniently disappeared. Michael absorbed this information, the pieces beginning to form a disturbing pattern. And Sarah Thompson, the social worker. Martinez looked surprised. She wasn't on my radar yet. What about her? She showed up here hours after I canceled my appointments. Knew exactly where to look for Emma. It felt coordinated. I'll look into her, Martinez promised, making a note. What's your plan here? Mike, harboring a runaway minor is serious business, especially for someone with your public profile. Michael paced the length of his study. I need evidence. Hard evidence that Hayes is abusing children at Guardian Hope. Enough to convince a judge to keep Emma away from there while a full investigation is conducted. That won't be easy, Martinez warned. Places like that are fortresses, staff loyalty, confidentiality agreements, security systems. And if what the kid says is true about this Jason's sister disappearing, Hayes knows how to cover her tracks. Emma mentioned a book, Michael remembered suddenly. She said Hayes keeps records a special notebook in her office. Transactions or something. Martinez raised an eyebrow. That could be valuable, but we'd need access to her office. What about former employees? Anyone leave under suspicious circumstances? I'll check, Martinez promised. But these operations typically buy silence very effectively. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the study door. Emma stood in the doorway, her expression troubled. Emma, this is Mr. Martinez, Michael introduced. He's helping us learn more about Ms. Hayes. Emma nodded solemnly. I remember things, she offered. Things I heard at Guardian Hope. Ms. Hayes has a special book in her office. She writes in it whenever the fancy people come to look at us. Fancy people? Martinez asked gently. People from other countries. They come to watch us play, but they only want to meet certain kids. The pretty ones, or the smart ones, or the ones who look a certain way. Emma wrapped her arms around herself. They never want the older kids or the ones with problems. Michael and Martinez exchanged glances, the implication clear. Emma, did any kids ever leave with these fancy people? Martinez asked. She nodded. Sometimes, Ms. Hayes would tell us they got adopted by special families, but they never said goodbye, and we weren't allowed to ask questions. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Jason thinks his sister was taken by the fancy people, but Ms. Hayes says he's making up stories. Martinez closed his laptop. I need to make some calls. This sounds like it could be bigger than abuse. If Hayes is involved in illegal adoptions or trafficking. The doorbell rang for the third time that day, its chime slicing through the tension in the study. Michael checked the security monitor on his desk, his blood running cold at the sight of 2 police officers standing on his doorstep. Stay with Emma, he instructed Martinez. Keep her calm. Michael composed himself as he approached the front door. The officers were both young, clearly uncomfortable about confronting someone of his stature. Mr. Grayson, the taller one began, I'm Officer Reynolds. This is Officer Chen. We have a court order to search these premises for a minor Emma Winters. He handed Michael a document that appeared to his untrained eye to be legitimate. May we come in, sir? Michael scanned the order. It had been issued within the last hour, which meant someone had moved very quickly after Sarah Thompson's visit. Too quickly for standard bureaucracy. Of course, officers, he said smoothly, but I should inform you that Emma Winters is indeed here under my protection as her temporary guardian. The officers exchanged glances. Sir, we have orders to return Emma Winters to the custody of Child Protective Services for placement back at Guardian Hope Children's Center. I see. And are you aware that Emma has signs of physical abuse allegedly inflicted at that very facility? Michael's voice remained calm, reasonable. Or that a social worker visited just hours ago and documented these injuries? Officer Chen frowned. We were told the child has behavioral issues and may make false allegations. Were you told by Rebecca Hayes by any chance? The officer's silence confirmed his suspicion. Officers, I understand you have a job to do, Michael continued, but I cannot in good conscience allow Emma to be returned to an environment where she was harmed. I've already consulted with my attorneys about filing for emergency custody. That's not our concern, sir, Reynolds said firmly. We have a valid court order. Please produce the child. Michael's mind raced calculating options, risks, consequences. In the corporate world, he excelled at finding leverage. But this wasn't a business negotiation. This was Emma's safety, possibly her life. Before he could respond, Martinez appeared in the hallway. Officers, I believe you'll want to see this before proceeding. He held up his phone, displaying what appeared to be an email. I've just received confirmation from Judge Harrington's office that a temporary stay has been placed on any removal orders for Emma Winters, pending an emergency hearing tomorrow morning. The officers examined the email, clearly confused by this development. "This appears to be in order," Officer Chen said finally, "but we'll need to confirm with the judge's office." "By all means," Martinez handed them a business card. "I'm a licensed investigator working this case. That's my contact information when you've confirmed the stay." After the officers left to make their calls, Michael turned to Martinez. "Judge Harrington," Martinez grinned slightly, "old friend, owes me a favor from when his daughter got into some trouble last year. The stay is legitimate, but it's only good until tomorrow's hearing. That gives us, 18 hours? Less," Martinez corrected. "The hearing is at 9 a.m., and Mike, we need more than Emma's testimony and some bruises. Hayes has connections influence. She'll bring an army of character witnesses singing her praises." Michael thought of the notebook Emma had mentioned, records of transactions, visitors from foreign countries, children who disappeared without goodbyes. If they could find that evidence... "We need to get into Guardian Hope," he decided. "Tonight." Martinez's eyebrows shot up. "Breaking and entering." "That's a felony, Mike. You could lose everything, your company, your reputation." "What good is any of that if I can't use it to protect a child who needs help?" Michael countered. "I've spent 3 years burying myself in work, in money, in success that means nothing. This matters, David. She matters." Martinez studied him for a long moment. "You've changed since I saw you last." "Maybe I'm finally remembering who I used to be," Michael replied, "before I lost everything that mattered." After ensuring Emma was settled safely upstairs, Michael and Martinez formulated their plan. Guardian Hope would have security systems, but as a contractor who had once bid on renovations to the facility, Michael had access to the building plans. Martinez, with his law enforcement background, knew how to navigate such systems with minimal risk of detection. They would enter after midnight, locate Hayes' office, find the notebook Emma had described, and be out before the night staff made their rounds at 2 a.m. The plan was dangerous, illegal, and potentially catastrophic for Michael's career and freedom. But when weighed against Emma's safety, there was no real choice. As evening fell, Michael checked on Emma, finding her curled up in the guest bedroom, with a book from Elizabeth's collection. "You doing okay?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. She nodded, though her eyes betrayed her anxiety. "Are those policemen coming back?" "Not tonight," Michael assured her. "And tomorrow we have a chance to tell a judge everything that happened at Guardian Hope, Ms. Hayes will lie," Emma said softly. "She always does. And people believe her because she's a grown-up." "Some people might believe her," Michael acknowledged. "But not everyone. Not me." Emma studied him with those old eyes in a young face. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." The question echoed Sarah Thompson's earlier challenge. This time, Michael had a clearer answer. "Sometimes people come into our lives exactly when we need them," he said. "I think maybe we found each other for a reason, Emma. You needed someone to believe you and I." He paused, the realization crystallizing. "I needed to remember that there are things worth fighting for." Emma considered this, then reached out tentatively to touch his hand. "I'm sorry about Elizabeth. She looks like she was nice." "She was." Michael smiled, the memory bringing warmth rather than just pain for the first time in years. "She would have liked you." Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Michael prepared for the mission to Guardian Hope. He changed into dark clothing, pocketed the small flashlight and gloves Martinez had provided, and left explicit instructions, with his most trusted security guard, to watch over Emma. Martinez waited in a nondescript car 2 blocks from Michael's home. "Last chance to back out," he warned as Michael slid into the passenger seat. "After this, there's no going back." Michael thought of Emma's bruises, her fear, her quiet resilience in the face of betrayal by those meant to protect her. "I'm already past that point," he replied. "Drive." Guardian Hope Children's Center occupied a renovated brick building in Dorchester, its exterior deceptively welcoming with colorful murals and well-maintained grounds. At midnight, the building was mostly dark, save for security lighting and a few windows where night staff monitored the sleeping children. Martinez parked several blocks away, and they approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. Using the building plans, they identified a service entrance with minimal security coverage. Martinez made quick work of the lock while Michael kept watch. Inside the building was eerily quiet. Their footsteps, despite their caution, seemed unnaturally loud on the polished floors. Following Emma's description, they made their way to the administrative wing where Rebecca Hayes kept her office. The office door featured a more sophisticated lock than the service entrance, but Martinez again demonstrated his specialized skills. Within minutes, they were inside, closing the door silently behind them. Rebecca Hayes' office projected the perfect image of a dedicated childcare professional. Awards and certifications lined the walls. Photos of smiling children decorated the shelves, everything meticulously arranged to convey competence and compassion. "Check the desk," Martinez whispered. "I'll take the filing cabinet." Michael carefully searched the desk drawers, finding nothing but standard administrative documents. No special notebook, no incriminating records. His frustration mounted with each empty drawer. "Nothing in the files," Martinez reported after several tense minutes. "Just official paperwork, all perfectly in order." Michael stepped back, surveying the room with a critical eye. If he were hiding something important, where would he keep it? His gaze settled on the bookshelf behind Hayes' desk. Unlike the precisely arranged items elsewhere in the office, several books on the middle shelf seemed slightly out of alignment. He moved closer, examining the shelf. The books were expensive legal volumes, the kind purchased for appearance rather than use. Michael carefully removed one, finding nothing unusual. Then another. On the third book, he noticed something odd. The book was lighter than it should be. He opened it, discovering it had been hollowed out to create a hidden compartment. Inside lay a small, leather-bound notebook, exactly as Emma had described. Michael's heart raced as he flipped through the pages. The notebook contained dates, initials, amounts, and coded descriptions. Some entries were marked with symbols he didn't recognize. "David," he whispered urgently, "I found it." Martinez joined him, examining the notebook. "This looks like a transaction ledger," he murmured. "Dates, payments, and these could be client identifiers. We need to take this." Michael hesitated. "If we take it, Hayes will know someone was here." "We don't have time to photograph every page," Martinez argued, "and this could be the evidence we need for the hearing tomorrow." The decision was made for them when a sound from the hallway froze them both. Footsteps approaching the office. The night security guard making rounds earlier than expected. Martinez quickly closed the hollowed book and returned it to the shelf while Michael pocketed the notebook. They moved silently to the wall beside the door, flattening themselves against it as the footsteps drew nearer. The doorknob turned slowly. Michael held his breath, adrenaline flooding his system. If they were caught, everything would be lost. His freedom, his reputation, and most importantly, his ability to protect Emma. The guard shone a flashlight through the partially open door, its beam sweeping across the office. For an agonizing moment, Michael thought they would be discovered. Then the light withdrew, the door closed, and the footsteps continued down the hallway. They waited 5 long minutes before daring to move again. "That was too close," Martinez breathed. "We need to get out, now." They retraced their steps, carefully hyper-aware of every creak and shadow. The notebook seemed to burn in Michael's pocket, its contents potentially explosive. As they neared the service entrance, Martinez suddenly raised a hand, signaling Michael to stop. Voices drifted from around the corner. 2 people engaged in a hushed conversation. 1 male, 1 female. As Michael and Martinez pressed themselves into an alcove, the female voice became clearer. "Everything is proceeding as planned. The hearing tomorrow is a minor setback." Michael recognized the voice immediately. Sarah Thompson. "We can't afford setbacks," the male voice replied. "The clients are expecting delivery next week. They've paid substantial deposits." "Grayson is a problem we didn't anticipate," Sarah continued, "but he's operating on emotion, not strategy. Once the judge sees Hayes' documentation of Emma's behavioral issues, he'll order her immediate return to Guardian Hope. And if he doesn't, then we move to contingency plan. Either way, this will be resolved within 48 hours. The conversation continued, but the voices faded as the speakers moved away. Michael and Martinez exchanged shocked glances. Sarah Thompson, the social worker ostensibly investigating Hayes, was clearly complicit in whatever operation they were running. They managed to exit the building without further incident, but the revelation had changed everything. The conspiracy was larger, more organized than they had imagined, and tomorrow's hearing was clearly rigged against them. "We need to get this notebook translated," Michael said as they drove back toward Beacon Hill. Figure out what these codes mean, identify the transactions. Martinez nodded grimly. I know someone who specializes in financial forensics, but Mike, you heard Thompson. They're expecting to get Emma back tomorrow one way or another, and these people don't seem like the type to accept defeat gracefully. The implication hung heavy in the car. Emma wasn't just at risk of returning to an abusive situation. If Sarah and Hayes were involved in child trafficking, as the conversation suggested, Emma's knowledge made her a liability they might not allow to exist. We need a backup plan, Michael realized. Somewhere safe to take Emma if the hearing goes against us. You're talking about running with her, Martinez said carefully. That's kidnapping, Mike, no matter how noble the intention. And what they're doing is trafficking, Michael countered. If the system won't protect her, then I will, whatever it takes. As they approached Michael's home, a sense of foreboding settled over him. The quiet street seemed too quiet. The security lights around his property too dim. Something wasn't right. Martinez sensed it too, slowing the car. Your security guard should be visible at the front. Michael's phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. 4 words that turned his blood to ice. We have the girl. The next message contained an image. Emma, terrified but alive, held firmly by a man whose face remained out of frame. In the background, Michael could make out what appeared to be a warehouse interior. Follow instructions, or she dies. The world around Michael Grayson seemed to collapse into a singular, horrifying point of focus. The image of Emma, terrified but alive, burned into his retinas as he stared at his phone. His security guard lay unconscious near the front steps of his home, a dark shape barely visible in the shadows. They were watching us, Martinez muttered, scanning the street with professional wariness. They knew we left, waited for the perfect moment. Another message appeared on Michael's screen. Warehouse 17, Pier 9. 1 hour. Come alone. Bring the notebook. No police. Cold determination replaced the initial panic that had seized Michael's chest. He had faced corporate takeover attempts, ruthless competitors, and billion-dollar negotiations. But nothing in his business career had prepared him for this, a child's life hanging in the balance with him as the only hope for rescue. They want the notebook, Michael said, showing Martinez the message. Martinez nodded grimly. And once they have it, they'll have no reason to keep either of you alive. I need to go. Michael checked his watch. We have less than an hour. Not alone, Martinez countered. That's suicide, Mike. These people are professionals. You walk in there without backup, neither of you is walking out. Michael stared at the image of Emma again, seeing not just her fear, but her trust. The belief that he would come for her, that he wouldn't abandon her like everyone else in her young life had done. I won't risk her life, Michael insisted. If they see anyone else, they won't, Martinez assured him. I wasn't a detective for 20 years without learning a few things about hostage situations. We need a plan, and we need it fast. Inside Michael's study, they quickly assessed their resources. The notebook contained damning evidence against Hayes and her operation, but without time to analyze it fully, they couldn't be certain exactly what they had. Martinez photographed each page with his phone, sending the images to a secure server as backup. I know this area, Martinez said, pulling up a map of the Boston waterfront on his laptop. Warehouse 17 is at the far end of Pier 9, isolated minimal security cameras. Perfect for their purposes. How many people are we likely dealing with? Michael asked, checking the handgun in his desk drawer, a precaution he'd taken after a corporate threat years ago, though he'd never fired it outside a shooting range. Based on an operation this size, at least 3 on site. Hayes and Thompson are probably coordinating remotely. Martinez sketched a rough layout of the warehouse. Single main entrance here, loading dock here, and likely a service door on the east side. Limited escape routes which works both for and against us. Michael tucked the gun into his waistband, hoping he wouldn't need to use it. I'll go in the main entrance as instructed. Create a distraction if possible. You find a way in through the service entrance. And if things go south, Michael's expression hardened, then I make sure Emma gets out, whatever it takes. Martinez studied his client, seeing a transformation he hadn't anticipated. The cold, calculated CEO had given way to something more primal, a protector willing to sacrifice everything for a child who had entered his life just 2 days ago. Mike, Martinez said quietly, are you sure about this? You've known this kid for all of 48 hours. You're risking your life, your freedom, your entire empire. Michael didn't hesitate. Some things are worth more than empires, David. I learned that the hard way when I lost my family. I won't fail Emma the way I failed them. They arrived at Pier 9 with 15 minutes to spare. The waterfront was deserted at this hour, the normally busy shipping area eerily silent. Warehouse 17 loomed at the end of the pier, a hulking shadow against the night sky. A single light burned near the entrance, illuminating patches of cracked concrete and rusted metal. "Remember," Martinez said as Michael prepared to approach alone, "they need you to hand over that notebook in person. That gives you leverage. Stall as long as possible. I'll find Emma and get her out." Michael nodded, the weight of the notebook heavy in his coat pocket. "If anything happens to me, I'll make sure she's safe," Martinez promised. "Now go save your girl." The walk to the warehouse entrance felt like the longest of Michael's life. Each step on the concrete pier echoed in the night air, announcing his arrival to whoever waited inside. The familiar weight of power and privilege that had insulated him throughout his adult life had vanished, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. The warehouse door stood partially open, spilling harsh fluorescent light onto the pier. Michael paused, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The interior was vast and mostly empty, with rusted machinery and abandoned shipping crates creating a maze of shadows. In the center, under the harsh glare of industrial lights, stood three figures. Emma sat on a wooden chair, her hands bound in front of her, her face tear-streaked but defiant. Behind her stood two men in dark clothing, one tall and muscular with a shaved head, the other shorter with a pockmarked face. Both had the hard eyes of men accustomed to violence. "Mr. Grayson," the taller man said, his voice carrying a slight Eastern European accent. Prompt as expected. "Did you come alone?" "Yes," Michael answered, focusing on Emma's face, trying to convey reassurance with his eyes. "Are you okay, Emma?" She nodded slightly, her gaze never leaving his face. Even in her terror, she maintained a composure that belied her 7 years. "The notebook," the man demanded, extending his hand. "Now, release her first," Michael countered, staying where he was. "That was the deal." The man laughed coldly. "There is no deal. There is only what you will do to keep this child alive." To emphasize the point, the shorter man placed a hand on Emma's shoulder, his fingers digging visibly into her flesh. She winced, but made no sound. "Don't hurt her," Michael said, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "I have what you want, but I need to know she'll be safe." "Your concern is touching," a new voice said from the shadows. Rebecca Hayes stepped into the light, immaculately dressed, despite the hour, her blonde hair perfectly styled. She looked more like she was attending a charity gala than a criminal exchange. "Ms. Hayes," Michael acknowledged, his suspicions confirmed. "I should have guessed you'd be here personally." "Some matters require a personal touch, Mr. Grayson." She circled Emma's chair, her heels clicking on the concrete floor. "When valuable assets are at risk." "Assets," Michael repeated, disgust evident in his voice. "Is that what these children are to you?" Hayes smiled thinly. "Everything has a value, Mr. Grayson. I would think a businessman like yourself would understand that concept. Some children are worth more in the right market than others. Emma here, with her particular appearance and intelligence, commands a premium price." The casual admission of human trafficking turned Michael's stomach, but he maintained his composure. Every moment he kept Hayes talking was another moment for Martinez to get into position. "So Guardian Hope is just a front," he said, taking a careful step forward. "A way to access children with no one to protect them." "A simplistic view," Hayes corrected. "Guardian Hope provides legitimate services to many children. But the exceptional ones, the special ones, they deserve exceptional homes, don't they? Wealthy families across the globe who can provide opportunities these children would never otherwise have." "Opportunities," Michael's voice hardened. "Or ownership," Hayes shrugged elegantly. "Semantics. Now the notebook, Mr. Grayson. My patience is limited." Michael reached slowly into his pocket, withdrawing the leather-bound book. "Let Emma go, and it's yours." "I don't think you understand your position here," Hayes replied. "You don't make demands. You comply, or the child dies. It's that simple." To emphasize her point, the shorter man produced a knife, holding it against Emma's neck. The little girl's eyes widened, but she remained silent, her gaze fixed on Michael. "Okay," Michael said, quickly raising his hands. "No need for that. I'll give you the notebook. Just don't hurt her." He took another step forward, the notebook extended in his hand. As he approached, he scanned the warehouse for any sign of Martinez. Nothing yet. "That's better." Hayes said, nodding to the taller man to retrieve the book. Cooperation makes everything so much easier. As the man approached, Michael noticed something familiar about him. Then it clicked. He was one of the security guards from Guardian Hope, visible in the background of a promotional photo Michael had seen during his research. The guard snatched the notebook from Michael's hand, quickly flipping through it to confirm its authenticity before handing it to Hayes. She examined it with evident relief. "Very good," she murmured. "All present and accounted for." "I've given you what you wanted," Michael said. "Now let Emma go." Hayes closed the notebook, a smirk playing across her lips. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Mr. Grayson. Emma has seen and heard too much, as have you." The shorter man tightened his grip on Emma, causing her to whimper. The sound ignited something primal in Michael, a protective fury he hadn't felt since the days when Elizabeth was alive. "You won't get away with this," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "People know where I am. Important people. If anything happens to me or Emma, they'll tear your operation apart." "A bluff," Hayes dismissed. "We've been running this business for 8 years, Mr. Grayson. We know how to make problems disappear." "Like Lily?" Emma's small voice cut through the tension. "Jason's sister. Did you make her disappear too?" Hayes' expression flickered for an instant's surprise and irritation crossing her features before her mask of control returned. "Children should be seen, not heard," she said coldly. "And soon, Emma, you won't be either." The threat hung in the air, but Michael noticed something Hayes had missed, a shadow moving behind the stacked crates to their left. Martinez was in position. Michael needed to create a distraction. He took another step forward, drawing the guard's attention. "Whatever you're planning, it won't work. I made copies of the notebook, sent them to my lawyer, the police, the FBI." "Another bluff?" Hayes said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "You didn't have time. Are you willing to bet your operation on that?" Michael pressed. "Your freedom, your life. Because I guarantee if anything happens to Emma or me, those copies will find their way to every law enforcement agency in the country." As he spoke, Michael saw Martinez slip closer, now directly behind the shorter guard, holding Emma. "Enough of this," Hayes snapped, her composure cracking. "Finish them both. Now." The taller guard reached inside his jacket, but before he could draw his weapon, the warehouse erupted into chaos. The overhead lights suddenly cut out, plunging the space into darkness, save for the emergency exit signs, casting an eerie red glow. Michael moved, instantly diving toward Emma's position. He collided with the shorter guard, sending them both crashing to the floor. In the dim red light, he saw Martinez pulling Emma from the chair, cutting her bonds with a swift movement. Gunshots echoed through the warehouse, the muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the chaos. Michael felt rather than saw the bullet that grazed his arm, a hot line of pain that he pushed aside through sheer adrenaline. "Emma!" he called out, desperate to locate her in the darkness. "Here!" Martinez's voice came from his right. "East exit, move!" Michael scrambled to his feet, disoriented in the darkness. He made out Hayes' silhouette as she fled toward a side door, the notebook clutched in her hand. For a split second, he was torn between pursuing her and reaching Emma. It wasn't really a choice. He ran toward Martinez's voice, finding them crouched behind a stack of crates. Emma launched herself into his arms the moment he appeared, clinging to him with desperate strength. "I knew you'd come," she whispered fiercely. "I knew you wouldn't leave me." "Never," Michael promised, holding her tightly. "I will never leave you." "Touching reunion," Martinez interrupted. "But we need to move. Now." They made their way toward the east exit, keeping low, as more gunshots rang out behind them. The guards were firing blindly into the darkness, hoping for a lucky hit. The exit door was locked, but Martinez made quick work of it with tools from his pocket. They burst out into the night air, the cold a shock after the warehouse's stuffy interior. "My car is on the other side," Martinez said, leading them along the edge of the building. "We need to—" His words cut off as a figure stepped out from around the corner. Sarah Thompson stood blocking their path, a gun held steadily in her hands. "That's far enough," she said calmly. "Hand over the girl." Michael pushed Emma behind him, shielding her with his body. Martinez had his own weapon drawn now, creating a standoff. "It's over, Thompson," Martinez said. "We know everything. The trafficking, the abuse, all of it. Hayes has the notebook, but we have copies. They're already being sent to the FBI." Thompson's expression didn't change. "A minor setback. We have operations in 6 countries, contingency plans, powerful friends. This is bigger than you can imagine, Mr. Martinez. Maybe, Michael interjected, "but I'm betting your powerful friends won't be eager to associate with you once your crimes are exposed. People like that hate publicity." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Thompson's face, quickly masked. "Step aside, Grayson. The girl comes with me. You've caused enough trouble." "No," Michael replied, simply the word carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "She stays with me." Thompson's finger tensed on the trigger. "Then you'll both die here." What happened next unfolded in seconds that felt like hours. As Thompson began to squeeze the trigger, Emma darted out from behind Michael, her small voice ringing with conviction. "I remember you," she said, pointing at Thompson. "You came to Guardian Hope last year when Lily disappeared. You talked to Ms. Hayes in her office. I heard you. You said the buyers paid extra for blonde girls. You said Lily would fetch a good price in Dubai." Thompson's focus shifted to Emma for a crucial second. A second Martinez used to his advantage. His hand moved in a blur, knocking Thompson's gun aside as it fired. The bullet struck the ground harmlessly. Before Thompson could recover, Martinez had her disarmed and pinned against the warehouse wall. "Sarah Thompson," he said formally, "you're under citizen's arrest for conspiracy to commit child trafficking, kidnapping, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." As Martinez secured Thompson with zip ties, Michael knelt beside Emma, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did they do anything to you?" She shook her head, her small face solemn in the dim light. "I'm okay. I remembered what you said about being brave." The sound of sirens in the distance cut through the night air. Martinez had managed to alert the authorities after all. "We need to go," he said urgently. "Now, Hayes is still out there with the notebook." "Let her run," Michael replied, lifting Emma into his arms. "We have the evidence that matters." They made it to Martinez's car just as police vehicles began swarming the pier. Rather than fleeing, Martinez drove directly to the first police cruiser, identifying himself as a licensed investigator. Within minutes, they were surrounded by officers, the warehouse secured, and Thompson taken into official custody. Emma refused to let go of Michael, clinging to him, even as paramedics attempted to examine her. Only when he promised to stay right beside her did she allow them to check her for injuries. "You're a very brave girl," the female paramedic told Emma as she applied antiseptic to a cut on her arm. "One of the bravest I've ever met." Emma looked up at Michael, a small smile breaking through her exhaustion. "I had help." As dawn broke over Boston Harbor, Michael and Emma sat side by side in the back of an ambulance, thermal blankets wrapped around their shoulders. Detective Sergeant Carlos Vasquez of Boston PD's Special Victims Unit stood before them, notebook in hand. "This is just preliminary," he warned, "but based on what we're seeing here, Hayes was running an international adoption scheme with a side of trafficking. Thompson was her contact inside social services, helping to identify children and falsify paperwork." "What happens now?" Michael asked, his arm protectively around Emma's shoulders. "We've got an APB out for Hayes," Vasquez replied. "The feds are involved now too. This operation likely crosses state lines, possibly international borders. It's going to be a big case. And Emma," the detective's expression softened, "she's a key witness. We'll need her testimony when the time comes. As for her immediate placement," he hesitated, glancing at the child who was now dozing against Michael's side. "Normally she'd go back into the system, but given the circumstances and your willingness to provide emergency care," hope flickered in Michael's chest. "Are you saying she can stay with me?" "Temporarily," Vasquez cautioned. "There will need to be a formal hearing, background checks, home studies, the whole process. But given your resources and the extenuating circumstances, I can push for an emergency placement in your care pending those proceedings." "Thank you," Michael said, meaning it more deeply than he'd ever meant those words before. As the detective moved away to coordinate with other officers, Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Are we going home?" she asked sleepily. Home. The word resonated through Michael, carrying a meaning it hadn't held in 3 long years. "Yes," he promised, smoothing her tangled hair. "We're going home." The emergency custody hearing took place at 9 a.m. as scheduled, though under vastly different circumstances than anyone had anticipated. Judge Eleanor Harrington, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for fairness, presided over the hastily arranged proceeding. Michael, still wearing the clothes from the previous night's ordeal, stood beside his attorney, Jack Sullivan. Emma sat in the front row, attended by a court-appointed advocate. The events at the warehouse had made immediate headlines with preliminary charges filed against Sarah Thompson, and a nationwide search underway for Rebecca Hayes. This is an unusual situation, Judge Harrington observed, reviewing the hastily assembled documents before her. Mr. Grayson, you're requesting emergency temporary guardianship of a minor with whom you have no prior relationship or connection. Under normal circumstances, this would be summarily denied. Michael nodded, fully aware of the legal obstacles. Yes, Your Honor. However, the judge continued, these are not normal circumstances. The child's previous placement has been compromised by criminal activity. The designated social worker assigned to her case is currently in custody facing serious charges. And according to Detective Sergeant Vasquez's statement, you risked your life to ensure the child's safety. She peered over her reading glasses directly at Michael. Why? Why would a man of your position and resources risk everything for a child you've known for less than 72 hours? The courtroom fell silent, waiting for his answer. Michael took a deep breath, searching for words that could possibly explain the profound shift in his priorities, his perspective, his very sense of self. 3 years ago, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. I lost my wife and daughter in an accident. I was supposed to pick them up, but I was caught in a meeting I deemed more important. By the time I arrived, it was too late. The judge's expression remained neutral, but her eyes softened slightly. I buried myself in work after that, built walls around what was left of my heart, convinced myself that success and wealth could fill the void their absence left behind. Michael glanced at Emma, finding strength in her trusting gaze. When I found Emma in my garden 3 nights ago, something changed. She reminded me what matters, what's worth fighting for. He turned back to the judge. I can provide Emma with safety, stability, education, all the material things she needs. But more importantly, I think we can help each other heal. She needs someone who believes in her, who will protect her at any cost. And his voice caught slightly, I need to remember how to be that person again. Judge Harrington studied him for a long moment. Ms. Chen, she addressed the court-appointed advocate, what is your assessment of this arrangement? The advocate stood. Your Honor, I've had limited time with Emma, but she expresses a strong desire to remain with Mr. Grayson. She displays trust in him that, given her trauma, is remarkable. My preliminary recommendation is for temporary placement with Mr. Grayson, with regular check-ins and a full hearing, scheduled for permanent guardianship. The judge nodded, then turned to Emma. Emma, would you like to say anything before I make my decision? Emma stood suddenly, seeming very small in the formal courtroom. Mr. Michael saved me, she said simply. Not just from the bad people, but from being alone and scared all the time. He promised he wouldn't leave me, and he didn't even when the men had guns. I want to stay with him, please. Judge Harrington's expression remained impassive, but there was a new warmth in her eyes. Thank you, Emma. You may sit down. After a brief pause, the judge delivered her ruling. I am granting emergency temporary guardianship to Michael Grayson for a period of 90 days, during which time a full home study and background check will be conducted. Regular visitation by court-appointed advocates will be required. A hearing for permanent guardianship will be scheduled at the conclusion of this period. She fixed Michael with a stern look. Mr. Grayson, the court is placing enormous trust in you. This child has experienced significant trauma and will need professional support, as well as your care. I expect you to provide both. I understand, Your Honor, Michael replied, and I will. Then this court is adjourned. The gavel struck with finality, and just like that, Michael and Emma were officially, if temporarily, a family. Outside the courthouse, spring sunlight bathed Boston in a golden glow that seemed to mirror Michael's cautious optimism. Emma held his hand tightly as they descended the courthouse steps, reporters gathering at the bottom, held back by Martinez and 2 uniformed officers. Are you ready for this? Michael asked her, quietly nodding toward the press. Emma squared her small shoulders. Together, right? Together, he confirmed, squeezing her hand. They faced the cameras briefly, Michael issuing a short statement requesting privacy during their adjustment period, emphasizing that the focus should remain on bringing Rebecca Hayes to justice and investigating the full scope of the Guardian Hope operation. When they finally reached the car, Emma let out a long breath. That was scary. Scarier than men with guns, Michael asked with a small smile. She considered this seriously. Different scary. Can we go home now? Home. There was that word again filling spaces in his heart he'd thought permanently empty. Absolutely, But we need to make a few stops first. You need clothes books, maybe a toy or two. Emma's eyes widened. Really? My own things? Really. Michael affirmed, the simple joy in her expression worth more than any business deal he'd ever closed. 6 weeks later, the grand Beacon Hill mansion had transformed. The formal spaces remained largely unchanged, but other areas had blossomed with life. Emma's room, not the guest room she'd first stayed in, but a newly decorated space she had helped design, burst with color and personality. Books filled the shelves, drawings covered the walls, and a collection of stuffed animals populated her bed. Elizabeth's room had changed too. No longer preserved as a shrine to grief, it had been carefully packed up, the most precious mementos moved to a beautiful memory box in Michael's study. The space was being renovated into a playroom, a place for new memories to form alongside the honored remembrance of those lost. Emma's nightmares, frequent in those first weeks, had gradually become less common. The child psychologist Dr. Martinez had reported steady progress in their twice-weekly sessions. Emma was resilient, the doctor explained, with an extraordinary capacity for trust, despite her experiences. Rebecca Hayes had been apprehended trying to cross the Canadian border 3 days after the warehouse incident. The notebook, combined with Emma's testimony and evidence seized from Guardian Hope, had unraveled an operation spanning 3 continents. 6 other staff members had been arrested, and 27 children, identified as potential trafficking victims, were now in protected care. The investigation had revealed connections to wealthy clients in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, though many used intermediaries and shell companies to maintain deniability. The scandal had rocked Boston's philanthropic community, where Hayes had cultivated relationships with powerful donors who now scrambled to distance themselves. Michael had taken a leave of absence from Grayson Construction, appointing his COO as interim chief executive while he focused on Emma and the upcoming permanent guardianship hearing. The corporate world, once the center of his existence, had receded in importance, becoming just one aspect of a life newly rich with purpose. On a warm Sunday afternoon in June, Michael and Emma sat in the garden behind the house, working together on a project. The doghouse where they had first met was being renovated, painted white with bright blue trim to match the main house. "Do you think it's ready for the sign?" Emma asked, setting down her paintbrush. "I think it's perfect," Michael agreed, reaching for the small wooden plaque they had created together. Emma had insisted on making it herself, though Michael had helped with the wood burning. The plaque read, "For every child still searching for home, and for those who have found one." As they attached it above the doghouse door, Emma grew contemplative. "Do you think there are a lot of kids like me who don't have homes?" Michael nodded soberly. "More than there should be. We should help them," she declared with the simple conviction of childhood. "We have this big house and lots of money. We should help them find homes too." The idea took root immediately in Michael's mind, expanding with possibilities. A foundation, a network of vetted foster families, advocacy for system reform, real meaningful change. "Emma Grayson," he said, testing the name they both hoped would soon be official. "I think that's the best idea I've ever heard." She beamed at him, paint smudged on her cheek, happiness radiating from her in waves. "Can we start tomorrow?" Michael laughed, a sound that had once been rare in this garden, but now came easily and often. "We can start right now. Let's go inside and make a plan." As they gathered their painting supplies, a car pulled into the driveway. Jack Sullivan, Michael's attorney, stepped out waving a folder. "Jack," Michael called, setting down the paint cans. "We weren't expecting you today." Jack approached with a broad smile. "Couldn't wait until tomorrow. Judge Harrington expedited your case. Final hearing is scheduled for next Monday." Emma's grip on Michael's hand tightened. "What does that mean?" Jack crouched down to her level. "It means, Miss Emma, that if all goes well, and I have every reason to believe it will, you could officially be Emma Grayson by this time next week." Her face lit up with joy so pure it brought tears to Michael's eyes. Without warning, she threw her arms around Jack's neck, nearly knocking him off balance. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for helping us." Over Emma's shoulder, Jack met Michael's gaze, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "My pleasure, kiddo. Some cases are just special." Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Michael sat in his study reviewing the foundation proposal they had begun drafting together. The Emma Grayson Foundation for Children's Advocacy, a legacy not built on steel and concrete, but on compassion and second chances. His phone buzzed with a message from Martinez. Hayes talking, naming names. This goes deeper than we thought. Some very powerful people involved. Michael wasn't surprised. In his business career, he had glimpsed the dark underbelly of wealth and power often enough to know that influence could be wielded for terrible purposes. But he had also learned through Emma that the greatest power lay in standing between the vulnerable and those who would harm them. Another message followed. You sure you want to take this on? These people play for keeps. Michael thought of Emma sleeping peacefully down the hall, of Elizabeth and Sarah watching over them both, of the children still waiting for someone to fight for them. The answer required no thought at all. Absolutely, he typed back. Some things are worth fighting for. He set down his phone and walked to the window, looking out at the garden bathed in moonlight. The doghouse stood in silent testimony to how quickly life could change, how a chance encounter could rewrite the future. Michael had once built his identity on corporate towers and financial empires. Now he understood that true legacy was measured in lives touched in promises kept, in love given freely without expectation of return. Emma had asked him why he'd come for her that night in the warehouse. The answer was simple, though it had taken him 45 years and immeasurable loss to learn it. Because some bonds transcend blood, and time forged in moments of courage and compassion. Because family isn't always who you're born to, but who you die to protect. Because promises once made from the heart must be kept at any cost. The permanent guardianship hearing arrived on a perfect June morning, the courtroom filled with a small gathering of supporters. Martinez sat in the front row alongside Dr. Chen and Jack Sullivan's entire family. Even Judge Harrington seemed less stern today, a hint of warmth in her typically impassive demeanor. Emma wore a new blue dress for the occasion, her hair neatly braided, her small hand gripping Michael's tightly as they waited for the proceedings to begin. The past 3 months had transformed them both. Emma blossoming from a frightened runaway into a confident, thriving child, and Michael rediscovering the heart he had walled away after losing his family. All rise, the bailiff announced as Judge Harrington entered. The hearing proceeded smoothly. The court-appointed advocates presented their final reports, unanimously recommending permanent guardianship. The home study had found Michael's residence exceptionally suitable, and his commitment to Emma's well-being extraordinary and unwavering. When Michael was called to speak, he stood with quiet confidence. Your Honor, 3 months ago, I stood before you as a man asking for a chance to help a child who had entered my life through the strangest of circumstances. Today, I stand before you as a different man entirely, one who has learned more from Emma than I could ever teach her. He glanced down at Emma, who smiled encouragingly. We come from different beginnings, Emma and I, but our stories have become intertwined in ways I could never have imagined. She has brought purpose back into my life. She has reminded me what matters. She has in every sense that counts become my daughter in heart, if not yet in law. Judge Harrington nodded, then addressed Emma directly. Emma, is there anything you would like to say before I make my final ruling? Emma stood smoothing her dress nervously. Yes, Your Honor. I want to stay with Michael. Forever. He keeps his promises. He makes me feel safe. And, she hesitated, gathering courage, I love him. He's my dad now. Maybe not the way I started, but the way I want to finish. Murmurs of emotion rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Harrington's composure wavered slightly. Well said, young lady, she acknowledged before straightening in her chair. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony in this matter, it is the ruling of this court that permanent legal guardianship of Emma Winters is hereby granted to Michael Grayson with all rights and responsibilities therein. She smiled, then a rare full smile that transformed her stern countenance. Furthermore, this court approves the petition for legal adoption pending the standard waiting period. Congratulations to you both. The gavel fell, and Emma launched herself into Michael's arms, tears of joy streaming down both their faces. Around them, their newfound family of friends applauded, sharing in a moment of pure, undiluted happiness. Outside the courthouse, bathed in summer sunshine, Emma looked up at Michael with wonder. It's real now, I'm really staying forever. Forever, he confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. You and me, kiddo, a family. Emma considered this, her expression turning serious beyond her years. You know what we should do to celebrate? What's that? A mischievous smile broke through her solemnity. "Ice cream for dinner." Michael laughed, lifting her into his arms as they descended the courthouse steps. "Ice cream for dinner it is." As they walked toward their future together, Michael reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple request on a stormy night. A child asking for shelter. A man rediscovering his capacity for love. Two souls finding in each other exactly what they needed most. Some called it chance, others fate. Michael Grayson knew it for what it truly was, a promise kept against all odds that would echo through generations to come.